Excellent. So we're going to do something a bit different. We haven't done this really before, but essentially I did a panel. We put some calls out on LinkedIn. We asked for people to send in some questions. We asked some of the team to send some questions, to think up some questions as well. For quite a diverse panel, and this is one thing we've always tried to do at the DX events, is to actually have a really diverse selection of disciplines. So it's not just a bunch of UI designers stood on a stage or user researchers stood on a stage. We've actually got a variety. So obviously we've got Helen from content design, we've got Mike from user research. David, I'm going to give you a chance to take the mic and just introduce yourself, because you've not spoken today, but you have spoken at a previous event.
Hi, I'm David. Senior accessibility consultant and user experience designer for Leeds Building Society. There's a nice DX Shots event that we did recently that is up on YouTube if you want to see the last talk we did, which was Beyond the Checkpoints.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
And we've also got, obviously, Mashooq, who you heard from GoDurance before. So, oh my God. Yeah, sorry. The previous venue that we originally had, we all had little radio mics, so we're all going to be walking around. It's going to be perfect. But we're going to have to pass this mic around like the conch shell. So, you know, that'll stop you all talking and arguing over each other as well. So, first question, and I'm going to start with you, David. So, awareness and consideration for accessibility and inclusivity are becoming more commonplace in product design, we hope. How do you feel that new technologies such as AI or any others impact approaches to accessibility? Are they powers for good, or are they something that might negatively impact accessibility?
Okay.
I'll pass that to you.
Okay. Good question. So ultimately, I think it'll be proven a power for good. See some just straight advantages straight away. So automated AI testing tools. So if you actually had a tool that could image recognize a piece of content, so you can say this is, I don't know, a picture of someone at the beach, does that actually make alt text redundant from that point onwards? Because if you have a tool that can identify any piece of image, would you be specifying that image from a design point of view? But then you can kind of take that a little step further, where you say, well, natural language processing on top of that could improve speech to text, text to speech, plus it improves translation, transcription. But does it take it a step further? You could say, well, now you can go text to sign language, or sign language to text via an automation within a camera app, something of that nature. So there's a lot of benefit you can put on top of it, but however, there's also quite a few negative aspects of it when implemented. So something you touched on earlier, which had a bit of a resonant effect with me, was the amount of biased data that could be implemented to form a further barrier by actually just using the AI point of it. I think that's a particular area that hasn't been explored as much. Everyone is so accelerating foot on the gas to actually get where they want to. That's one of the reasons. And to actually bring it back to a privacy matter earlier, going, how comfortable are you with having your face recorded into something that you didn't consent to, and then how it's used and its use points. So then you get to sort of stuff like over-reliance on that kind of technology, where if somebody doesn't want to use the AI, is there an opposite use? So if your actual browser all of a sudden just merged with an AI so it can give you personalization, sounds like a good thing, right up until the fact that you don't want your details in that database for that particular thing. And then you come back to the last one, which is cost. I mean, ultimately, I've used it quite extensively for certain things. Actually using it, just trying to get better descriptions of images is one of the things I've been trying to use OpenAI for with ChatGPT. It's a little bit like two noses. That's the perfect example from it earlier. But ultimately, I think with more time on the subject, I think it will ultimately be a power for good.
Does anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah. So I've got a bit of a kind of blue sky question really about this. It reminds me of Scotty in Star Trek, where he was just speaking to his computer and would do whatever it told him to. And I was just wondering, would we ever get to the point where, you know, that atrocious interface you showed us earlier, and all we said to it is, you know, just transfer the £100 regardless of what website it is, you know, just go there, ask me for my credentials, and this is what I want to do, and it would do the things for you, and to some level, kind of make it almost irrelevant how bad certain UIs are.
yeah, I think even just the thought of asking it is going to be a past tense thing. I think with Neuralink and a few other things, that just even thinking the subject should be able to drive an output for it. Whereas I do see your point going, at what point does that accelerate? But I think it ultimately gets to a point where maybe words are not needed within that space. If you can read what are the sort of electrograms of your brain to be able to produce an image to say this is what you're thinking of, then thinking of if you can produce or you're thinking of an apple through your brain waves, then formulation of the question just seems a little bit less relevant in that space. But we are talking blue sky thinking, maybe on the Star Trek Enterprise will be able to get that out. But it's a very interesting thought.
Not in our lifetime.
I don't think so. I wish. I'm a Star Wars nut myself, but I'd love to see it. But I don't think it's within the next 30 years for that kind of thing.
Anyone else to add to anything to that?
Please don't ask me anything.
We've turned it into an interview for David.
There's just a general quote that I didn't use in my talk that someone on the podcast recently said, talking about kind of the future and AI and our work, and it's like we won't be replaced by AI, but we may be replaced by people who know how to use AI. And I think that's a really important point, is that kind of need to upskill and to keep ahead of the curve, which is one of the reasons I'm doing the courses I'm doing, because I want to learn about this stuff myself. I don't know if that answered your original question, but...
That's all right, we've kind of meandered on, it's fine, no problem, it's fine. I'll go for the next question actually, and this one I'll start with you, Helen, on this one. So, do you feel, and this is content design related, so, do you feel content design over the years hasn't been given the credit it's due? What do you think we can do to combat this, and do you feel that improvements are being made?
I do think improvements are being made. I think there are some companies out there that really value content design. I think everybody should value content design, because you can have the most beautifully designed web page, app or form. You take the words away, you've got nothing. I recently had to put a claim in to Admiral Travel Insurance because my holiday was cancelled, and I went through, I'm a digitally savvy person, and I went through and I'd done it all in the wrong section because apparently my trip had been abandoned, not cancelled. I went for cancelled, but they said, nope, you've done it wrong. And then when I went to the abandoned section, they asked me to put in the carrier reference. I'm like, what is a carrier reference? Something to do with the plane? Is it my booking reference? Is it what? That is terrible content design. And somebody who puts more thought in that, you would phrase that question more carefully so that the user knew how to answer. So yes, I know that there are lots of content designers that feel aggrieved that some teams don't value the words. I know that. I'm lucky because Co-op does. And I think there are strides being made. There are content design conferences. There are people who really care about it. So hopefully it will just grow and people will see the value of what we do, and that we are not replaced by just AI, because I think you always need a human to check it. You're always going to need somebody to sense check stuff. And also I don't think AI can fake empathy just yet. Not enough. I have twiddled about with it. After talking to you, I did put a few prompts in and have a look to see, is my job safe? I think I've got about 5 years.
5 years?
I don't know. I mean, some of the content that came back was quite good, but there was loads of it and reams of it, and I don't think it can quite yet replace a human, I hope. But no, I think hopefully people do value content, because content is the user experience. Without it, you've got nothing.
Anybody else to add to that?
Yeah, well, really, I agree with all of that, and I think having worked a lot in government in the last 8 years, one of the things I love, I never thought I'd say I love working on government digital projects, but one of the great things that GDS, the Government Digital Service, the kind of a standard that they've embedded, is the importance of content design. So the agile teams I work with typically have an interaction designer, you have a user researcher, you also have a content designer who's an equally key person, Scrum Master, product manager, etc. And content is absolutely central to when you iterate the prototype based on the feedback. It's key, and it particularly in terms of government services, which are not visual, it's very much text based. Can you make things comprehensible to every citizen, and then obviously the accessibility part comes into it as well. I'm passing it this way.
That's good.
I've never thought about content in this way. When we are building systems, one of the techniques we use is called domain-driven design. And we have these things called bounded context and the ubiquitous language, which basically is a vocabulary that we use to design and comprehend the system. And the whole idea of domain-driven design is that it speaks the language of the business. And often this is a bunch of developers trying to understand and make up words and see, and involving, again, the content designers, UX people and so on into that effort actually builds that comprehension, and that comprehension actually makes systems easier to change. So I never thought of that before from that perspective.
Well, there you go.
That's a great point. And I think it is just having worked on government projects as well, and then moving between the government project where there is a content designer there as mandate, it's part of that whole team, and then you move back onto a private project where there maybe isn't, and suddenly you realise there's this gulf missing in the whole experience, I find. So it's actually, I think it's one of those things. Lots of teams seem to muddle on without them, and they can just about, but it's never the same. And I think this is it. And they miss so many opportunities in my experience. Anyway, so right. Well, next question. This is to Mash. So, ethical considerations in product design gaining prominence, or at least people are saying that they are gaining prominence. From your experience, what are some ethical challenges designers and developers might face, and how can they navigate these challenges to create products that prioritise well-being and respect for users?
Okay, so I'm no expert, and in fact when you gave me that question, I did chat GPT it as well, and I looked at a few other things, and I thought, okay, well it's all the same, they talk about kind of algorithmic bias and accessibility and privacy and all these things, and I thought that's not where the challenge is. In fact, the challenge is a bit more meta, is that convincing developers and designers that it's actually their concern. So often they get obsessed about the making part, that and don't actually start to think in what they're making and how that may impact people and communities and so on, because they think that it's not their concern. And I think the challenge is there. Once you convince yourself that A, it's your concern, and B, you have agency, then you can go and ask ChatGPT and it will give you a good answer.
Anybody else on that?
Just within the sort of an accessibility point of it, you do often get, we pledge to do more, we pledge to remove barriers, but without your actual sort of automated and manual testing with your audit right the way through, who owns that accessible part of that journey? It's actually the responsibility of everyone along that pipeline, not just the auditor at the very end of the project, because it was an afterthought. And usually that afterthought is related to the pledge that they made at the beginning, that they forgot, we will do this, we will succeed with this, but along the way, the actual mission statement has changed slightly, and they come to the end and go, by the way, we still got to deliver it in this manner. So sometimes you do see pledges made where, unfortunately for the companies that I work for, I will call them on such pledges if I find the audit has not gone the way it's supposed to. So for me, it's a case of that can be quite a lonely position to take, where an entire division may have put something together and you're at the very end going, we can't go live with this. It can be quite devastating for everyone involved, especially trying to remain friends with that division and people from there as well, because they're all colleagues that you work with. So it can be tricky, but actually just remembering where the original reason for the pledge was, I believe, is what sees you through in the end. But that's all I'd like to add.
I think on the sort of general ethics question, I'd fly the flag of user research, as I would do, just making sure you're talking to your users continually, iterating as you're going, and you're identifying the needs up front, and is what you're designing meeting those needs? That's what it always comes back to, or at least it should. Sadly, it doesn't often, or it can not, but it's very, very important that as you're going through that you're aware of what the users want and you're building for them. Thank you.
All good?
No, that's all right.
Good answer.
I'm just here to pet death.
Yeah, excellent. That's absolutely fine. Well, we've got one final question, and this is one to start with Mike. Again, remote work's become more common, and obviously that's impacted how user research is conducted. Especially during lockdown, as many of us might have attempted and had to conduct user research during lockdown. How have you adapted your user research methods to remote environments? What challenges have you experienced, and in what ways has that actually helped things, do you feel?
Zoom? I mean, it's a mixed picture. I'm actually kind of quite conflicted about this because obviously we had to switch rapidly to purely remote research when the pandemic kicked off, and in many ways it's never really gone back. So I think in terms of normalising remote research, that's been good, and people don't feel, you can do more research faster, people don't have to travel in. I remember running around when I was a previous contract doing some work with the Foreign Office, and we were trying to test some of the prototypes we were building with them on older users for the particular service we were building, and trying to get older people who were digitally kind of immature, didn't want to go online, into the office in London at the tail end of the pandemic. We were terrified that they were going to catch COVID on the way in, etc., etc. But by being able to do everything remotely, it's much better. And also, and then you end up in these slightly weird situations where people are sitting kind of in their pajamas or their tracksuit bottoms in their beds, and you're kind of like, it's a little bit too, relaxed. But people are relaxed to do it, and actually, I think in some ways that benefits because they're not having to go into this strange building and sit, with a researcher and a mirror, mirror and in this lab. They can just chat. And I think they feel more open to it. But the counterpoint is, I miss going into people's houses. Obviously, when they allow us to going into people's going into offices as well, and particularly doing government work. When you go to, I did a piece of work with the Ministry of Justice, and going into law courts in certain parts of the country, and really seeing how paper-based a lot of the processes are, how nightmarishly slow and bureaucratic. Talking to someone on a Zoom call is not going to give you that insight. They're actually standing in a building and going, "Holy cow, this is how you do it now." So it's
I would agree. I think being able to do research on Zoom has been very useful for us in the type of research that we do, because I think people feel more confident when they're sitting in their own front room or their own bedroom. So that has been very useful. But one to watch out for is that we have had this conversation recently where all of the people that are coming to do research with us, they have to have certain criteria hit, so having had arranged a funeral, etc. But they are all affluent enough to own a laptop, digitally savvy enough to know how to get onto Zoom, and so we've zoomed in too much and we're only doing research with people who can have access to laptops and those sorts of digital technology, and we're missing the folk that can't, and those are the ones that we also need to reach. So I would say that was a downside. There are upsides as well.
totally agree.
So I think I was one of the odd cases when lockdown happened, where for me the remote working actually opened up the opportunity to work for Leeds Building Society. So I actually live in South Wales, so 5-hour commute, 10-hour round trip is not really great for your mental health on a daily basis, as you can imagine. So without the remote working aspect of it, it wouldn't be a job I would ever even entertained and going through that way. But it does come with its drawbacks, where if you are hard of hearing, hard of sight, then Teams does a certain level with this transcribe, and anything live is kind of good luck. I mean, trying to decipher a Welsh accent with subtitling is quite a funny thing to try and work out, as it is. But from a research, I have to imagine that actually having the user a little bit more comfortable in their room may give a difference of opinion than what they would have in the office as well. But I am not a UX researcher in any way, Amy. I'm not a researcher, so I'm going to stop talking and pass the mic. Anything to add? Passing it out.
I'll add something. No, I was just actually wanted to echo your point. My wife is a social worker and she works with elder people. And during the lockdown, it became so difficult for her to speak to people, because even when someone holds an iPad or an iPhone in front of them, they just don't comprehend, they don't understand it, and they don't even answer, or they're not cooperative. So it was super difficult for her. And it just got me thinking that this whole kind of, the digital kind of revolution plus the tendency to be more and more remote is actually leaving a very large section of society behind.
Yeah. It's on that point, I mean, we've done work where we've done research with children, and you can try and do remote research with children, but good luck, because actually, I mean, there are, it's, I mean, this is it. What you basically end up doing is you've done research with children who are confident enough and to actually use the device themselves, which isn't a reflective proportion of children, and also are confident enough to talk to you, a stranger, on a call like that. Now that's a very difficult situation. It's hard enough to do user research with children in person, so that's a trick all of itself. But if you actually say, oh, well, we did a load of remote sessions with children, well, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. It's the same as if you say, oh, I did a survey of the man on the street by going up to people with a clipboard. Well, you only spoke to people who approach people with clipboards on the street, and that's a very specific type of person. So yeah, you've got to just kind of be aware that what are you excluding by your methodology, I suppose. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yes.
Good. I'm asking you the question because you've got the microphone.
I realised I wanted to pass it because I'm the other way.
Anybody else have anything to add to that? Or finally, I'll just throw this out again. Has anybody got a question for anyone on our panel? Oh God, yeah. I'll tell you what, first hand that went up was right at the back there, so I'll come to you next.
I'm not a pure out-and-out digital person, but I kind of understand that artificial intelligence is here, it's here to stay. I'm not too afraid of that, but what I am afraid of is artificial intellect. Because I had a debate with a couple of mates over a few beers, like you do, and we were wondering what the difference between intelligence and intellect is. We came up with intelligence is just the ability to solve a problem, but intellect is to ask the fundamental question in the first place. And I think once machines can do that, I think that's when the dogs with the guns will turn up. What does the panel think?
Did everyone hear that?
I agree, and I think Mike should answer that one.
That's a good call.
That's a very good call.
So intellect versus intelligence?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, on the train up here, I was reading a book about AI, and the Turing test, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, where, if Alan Turing in the 50s, famous notable mathematician, came up with this test whereby if you could have somebody interacting with either a human or a machine and not knowing which is which, and if the answers are indistinguishable, if they can't tell whether they're interacting with a machine or a human, that is artificial intelligence. At least that's what he sort of posited back in the 50s. But you can game that, you can make, intelligence. I think there was one case where someone created a chatbot in the form of a Ukrainian teenager. So the fact that the syntax, this isn't kind of going back a few years, the syntax wasn't entirely clear or well written, hid the fact that it was actually an algorithm doing it. So it was actually hard to say, well, that could be something that a non-native speaker had written. So you can gamify it. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I mean, it's a really good question, and I don't have an answer, to be honest. I think when it's indistinguishable, that'll be a proper challenge.
There's a book called Life 3.0, I don't know if anyone's read it. It makes the distinction between AI and AGI. So what you term artificial intellect is actually AGI, artificial general intelligence. One of the litmus tests is that it starts making decisions about itself. So the book actually has quite a nice story about this event horizon, where at some point something is going to, these algorithms and so on that we're building, they're going to build something that then starts making its own decisions. And from there on, they are indistinguishable from consciousness and from life, and that's what they mean by Life 3.0. We are very far away from that. I mean, even looking at things like ChatGPT and so on, they are just better statistical methods, and they are tools that can have a lot of implications, and good and bad. Like things like Facebook, for example, had a lot of bad implications as well as some good. So there are things to worry and think about and so on, but I for one think that the AGI, the probability, let's say, and that's how it talks about, of AGI coming to fore in our lifetime is quite low.
There's actually just one thing to add, as a wise person said recently, always have an off switch.
Okay.
Sorry, I keep on.
You just It's becoming a little
I
tribal.
like, I like the
this
lead
stage.
singer of Westlife.
That's it. Well, I'm expecting the key change any moment. So we had a question.
My question was just getting some advice from David on accessibility advocacy. So the experience that you described there around being involved, so it's the same in my organisation, where I'm involved in the beginning and then end, and then it's very, very hard to, it becomes a conflict. So I think, have you got any advice for the group in terms of how do you advocate accessibility being got all the way through? And are there any, obviously we found from the user research that things like qualitative research is very powerful at getting people to understand and buy into those certain types of users and their needs. Have you got any advice for accessibility advocacy and getting people to understand how important that is in the design and development process?
So first and foremost, stick your guns on it. So that's what I always recommend to any auditor that I've ever met. Going, if you have reason to believe that a design is going to present a barrier to someone, and you can back it up with either your CAD guidelines or your sort of research to go with it, then stand true to that point and hold people accountable. It's not your responsibility that other people don't believe in your vision. That's the truth of the matter. It can be very difficult because sometimes they say, well, 80-20 rule, we'll get 4 out of 5 customers. But what they don't realise is how detrimental that is to the 1 in 5 out there. So to actually receive an email for us is maybe a paragraph on average, but this big. To receive that in Braille is 4 pages of A4 to do the exact same thing. So like, if we're saying, well, if that's the only method that you can go to, is your intention for somebody to read what is a 4-page pamphlet on something which is just your time to direct debit is 28th of the month? Is that really a process that we should put someone through on the basis of we can't send something over to them in that manner? It is very difficult. There's always key to look for champions in areas so that you can actually say, well, this is the vision, this is what we're aiming for. It's clear to have your goals defined at the beginning. But essentially it's one of those where they will see the vision at some point. At what point that is usually varies between businesses depending on the stakeholders that you actually manage. But in my experience, I tend to be, my colleagues would describe me as a little bit militant in the area. I think that's a given, that's a freebie. And for me, I take pride in that, to be honest with you. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be a little bit more approachable with things, but for me it's a case of, well, if I don't do this for my company, who will? And that's the point with accessibility. It is literally everyone's responsibility. Your copywriter has a responsibility for readability, not just the end of where it ends up on the website. So it's like, if you're having to deal with reading ages at the point of audit, then there's a whole lot of things that have happened at that point that you didn't have any assistance with. And in that moment, plan a retrospective with them. Take an agile book and throw it at them, saying we're doing a we're doing the retrospective to say this is what we're going to look at and to see where this was missed, especially if it wasn't identified in the earlier stages of discovery. Well, it's a very good question. Advocacy fatigue can creep in. You just got to, as we said, stick your guns on it. Make sure that what you said is somewhat relative to the actual problem that you have there. That, you know, if someone says the heading structure's right, don't just start talking about alt text. That you may lose them in the actual, in the detailing. Now, one of the things, just from a personal note, I'll try and be quick, is when we report, so we use the Web Content Access authoring guidelines, essentially. Now, not every one of our product owners will understand the detail between a level A, double A, single A. They usually don't understand that at all. So one of the things we did in LBS was instigate a priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 system on top of that. So the sort of metrics for that, it is a bit arbitrary, where priority 1 is this presents such a barrier that the product should not go live with this into it. Priority 2 is we understand the barrier, it is detrimental, but we understand the risk enough to go forward and launch our product. And then priority 3 is a compliance issue. So on the road to being, sort of accessible and compliant, you then have the complete setup. Now, from a product owner point of view, is all they get is a number of P1 issues. If that's a 0, then they're then instantly aware they can go live without having to know what the difference between a table or a radio button or an ARIA live attribute, something like that. They don't need to know the detail. What they need to know is if there's any number other than 0 in that column is more of a call to action because of how detriment there's going to be. That to me has helped a lot with my own stakeholder management in the company that I sit as a tip.
With Kang is quite abstract in the way it's written. In an
Totally agree.
In an ironic way. So like with Kang is actually inaccessible.
I have my issues with the own documentation that I'm militant towards. So like one of the things that gets on my nerves is the fact that alt text and subtitling is at the same level.
Yeah.
But the cost difference between those is immense. To actually get someone to transcribe video, depending on the tools and the video methods it's used, could reach in several thousands. Whereas adding alt text is a developer issue which they could deal with pretty 5-10 minutes. Yes, it has to be booked in and storybooked and estimated and all the rest, but in actual fact, it's a code and an attribute that you're adding. It's not something additionally that you're styling. I have my own issues with that. If you'd like to go on the YouTube channel for LION+MASON, you will find a talk called Beyond the Checkpoints from myself talking about that very matter. So I won't bore everyone here. Thank you.
Right, I'm just thinking on time. Has anyone got anything really burning? We've got one more. We'll take one more question then.
I want to ask for Helen for advice. So, do you have any advice on simplifying content so it could be more user-friendly? So just for the context, I'm doing content for a project where we have business to overcome their efficiencies by designing digital application for them. And most of the companies got their IT department were abandoned for a long time. They're not so tech savvy, I would say. So do you get any advice on how to explain for them in a very simple way so they understand what kind of app can help them?
Explain it simply as you can, in a human language without any technical jargon. And it can take you a while to maybe get to that point, but keep trying and keep checking. And the way to do it, the way to get content right when it's something complicated like that, is to check if people understand it by doing the research with them. And that's the only way you're going to understand, if people understand what you're trying to say. But I suppose, make it a priority that you put the work in and get the business, your business to also understand, because the more people can understand about your products, the better it's going to be for them to use and the better user experience. But I think really the only way to do it is to keep checking, is to write it in plain English and to make it as clear as possible. The national reading age, I think, is 9, maybe 12, something like that, that we write towards. So keep it really, really simple, but try it, test it. I really think the only thing you can do is to do your best to make it simple, and then check with the people that are going to use it if they can use it. Just watch them, observe, get a really brilliant user researcher to do that for you.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to let you all return to your seats. That was a bit close to my face, but there we go. Can I have a big round of applause, please, for all of our panelists?